Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to day 4 and the concluding session of SteelMint Engage 3.0, the Virtual Connect. Engage 3.0 has been held over 4 days from the 1st to the 4th of November 2022. In these webinars, we have discussed steel, iron ore, scrap, coal, ferroalloys, and non-ferrous. We have explored changing market dynamics in finished products and raw materials. We have listened to experts in the relevant fields to come up with valuable insights to facilitate decision making by businesses. The topic for discussion this evening is equally important. India's policies and initiatives in the recycling sector. What are the challenges ahead? I'm Madhumita Mukherjee, editor, Steel Mint, and I have with me Jayaprakash Sahu, Assistant General Manager, Scrap and Recycling, Steel Mint, here to jointly host this webinar. We would also like to thank the Ministry of Steel and the Indian Steel Association for their logo support to the webinar series. I also want to remind our attendees to send in their queries so that we can take this up towards the end of the session. And please denote your name and the company's name as well. I'm now inviting Jayaprakash, my colleague, to say a few words on today's topic, India's policies and initiatives in the recycling sector. What are the challenges ahead? JP, over to you.
Thank you, ma'am, for the introduction. Just to give a quick introduction about today's session, everybody knows that recycling means less trash going to our landfill. But the greatest environmental benefit of recycling is the conservation of energy and also the natural resources and the prevention of the pollution that is generated when raw material is used to make a new product. So be it a paper, be it a glass, be it a metal or plastic or any organic material. Recycling causes significantly less energy consumption, which results in less burning of fossil fuels also, like coal, oil, and natural gas. So if you particularly talk about the ferrous segment, government recently released National Steel Policy in 2017, and which aims to develop a globally competitive steel industry by creating a 300 million ton per annum of steel production capacity by 2030, with a contribution of 35 to 40% from the electric arc furnace and induction furnace. So it's very obvious the efficient use of scrap for the steel production becomes very crucial for India, as there is 35 to 40% share is being envisaged from the scrap-based production. So this will also increase the requirement of steel scrap from the present level of 30 million tons to the more than 70 million tons by 2030, as per the document. So the availability of right quality of scrap in adequate quantity is one of the critical factors for the future growth for both electric arc furnace, induction furnace, and also for the primary sectors, because primary sector also use scrap from 10 to 15% currently in India. And if you look into the global numbers, I think the percentage of scrap is even more in the primary sector in other countries. Like China, they are using 23 to 25%, and US is above 30%. So this scrap policy only furthers the role in the national steel policy to ensure scrap segregation, that is quality-wise, collection and the processing and the recycling. So this policy also aims to provide a framework to carry out all the activities in a very scientific manner for an assured and regular supply of processed scrap for the downstream industry. So so steel scrap comes from the various sources like mills. This also includes the structural items like beams. It also includes the reinforced steel and plates also. Then there are scrap source from the plant machineries also, including pipes, tubes, old vehicles, domestic goods, automotive, their industry like shipbuilding and railways also. So the current policy deals about the automobile, household, structural, railways and industries, etc. But it specifically excludes such industries like shipbreaking, which are covered under the separate policy. By looking at considering the upcoming demand of steel scrap for the steel production, government also launched the steel scrap recycling policy in 2019. The government also recently released the ELV recycling policy, and the draft non-ferrous recycling policy has also been released by the Ministry of Mines for the industry feedback. We all know that India is net importer of non-ferrous scrap. So a significant quantity of scrap is being imported from the overseas scrap. Just because the reason we don't have the organized recycling industry or the collection industry or domestic collection policy. Industry is also expecting developments on the e-scrap and battery recycling. Recently, in last week, and battery waste management rules were released. So the overall agenda is to develop a circular economy, and this can be achieved by two measures. Firstly, by recycling materials, and secondly, by the increasing the efficiency of use of these resources. And government roles and policies are very crucial to support such unorganized industry. In today's session, we will be more keen to learn about less talked policy aspects, which recycling industry of India is needed from our eminent guest who has worked extensively over the years on the policy part. Thank you very much.
Thank you, JP. I now invite our esteemed speaker, Mr. Dhawal Shah, Managing Director, Metco Ventures LLP, to make his speech. Mr. Shah started his career in the mid-90s and has truly transformed Metco from a simple sales agency in the domestic market for metal-based raw materials into a world-class international brokerage company for secondary metals and alloys. Having spent over 25 years with the company, he is responsible for Metco's diversified product portfolio and global market reach. He has a thorough insight into the metals recycling industry and has built a robust reputation in the supply chain of several metals consuming industries worldwide. Over to you, Mr. Shah.
Well, thank you. And it feels great to be here on this platform and talking to your members and talking to Steel Mint about what's really happening on the policy front as on the non-ferrous metals recycling. So yeah, I think as you mentioned in the introduction that I've spent about almost 25 years in this industry, and I think the last 4 to 5 years have been very engaging and interesting. And the reason why I say so is because obviously there has been some sort of a paradigm shift in terms of how India is developing as a base or a hub for secondary recycled metals, materials, and alongside how policy is playing an important role, working with the industry, trying to address the issues that are there. And again, as I said, if I look at the future, I could only say that we as a country, we as an industry are certainly at the cusp of seeing tremendous growth. And I think when I look at the potential of this industry in terms of how it processes its materials and the kind of value it can deliver, not only to India, but even for the export markets, I think that's tremendous. So I think, yeah, we're just there at the, I would say that the timing is right. I think, and India with the right policies can deliver a lot. So I think it's a win-win situation for the industry itself and for the government as well. I think with their support and with the right policies, I think they will see that, there's this one industry which can do really wonders. At the moment, I think the world is going through a little kind of a sweet sour situation in terms of how the economic conditions are concerned. But I think there's this one industry which is still very upbeat and kind of, do wonderful things. So once again, thank you for having me here. And I think for whatever little that I have learned in the last years as with my interaction with the government, I'll be most happy to share with you and, take this discussion forward. So thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for highlighting the policy aspects and the importance of, the government's role for the industry. Madhumita ma'am, over to you.
Yes, Mr. Shah, we'll go over to questions from Steel Mint side. I have a question for you, and that is, experts have emphasized the urgent need for BIS standards for scraps to address quality, environment, and safety concerns as per global benchmarks, and check the recycling usage and inputs of substandard scrap. So what is your take on that?
I think it's a very important question because I think industry is spending a lot of time on this, understanding what is there in BIS as the theory as it spells out, and also between the lines. Now, personally, I think I'm going to be a little very vocal and kind of candid about this, that I think BIS is about pushing non-tariff barriers against the secondary industry. This intent has been formally owned and accepted by the primary industry in one of the joint meetings that we had with them, along with the BIS. So I think it's a move which they think perhaps would give them let's say, an extra room in terms of sales towards certain categories of products or its application. But I guess this kind of falls flat when our Honorable Prime Minister repeatedly, consistently, and emphatically talks about reduce, reuse, and recycle, and about making circular economy as a way of daily life. Just about 2 weeks back, he launched a big program, a Mission Life, along with the UN Secretary General, and if you understand this Mission Life, I think the basic tenets kind of revolve around conservation and lifestyle changes to make our environment better. Anyways, getting back to the mainstream, talking about BIS, the point that I'm simply trying to make here is that while the secondary industry is taking this discussion forward with BIS, the push for the same emanates from commercial interest of a certain section of industry. And this is my way of interpreting things. Now, if you really look at India and its recycling capabilities, I would just say that we are perhaps the most efficient recyclers in the world. As Indians, we are frugal mindsets. Every material which has commercial value is being and will be always recycled. The only trouble here is that there are multiple forces in the play. It's a myriad of people, several layers, engaging lakhs and lakhs of human hands who actually prepare furnace-ready material for our furnace, for our smelters on a daily basis. You spoke about the output, the quality, what kind of quality we are able to deliver. Now, today, I'll just cite you an example here. If you look at, for example, secondary aluminum, we have a huge industry which makes die casting alloys. Now, that's kind of an indispensable source of raw material for the automotive industry. So be it the likes of Maruti Suzuki, Toyota, TVS, Bajaj, Hero. And not only that, I think it's just not them as Indian companies or OEMs. We even export these ingots to the Japanese OEMs. So I think that kind of speaks volumes for the kind of output what this industry is able to achieve in terms of the excellence in quality. And similarly, I think the case is with our other materials. If you look at our recycled brass, bronze, the leads, the refined leads that we make here, the copper, refined copper, the stainless products, they are all world-class products with key applications. So I think somewhere it's time to change the narrative or the perception about, the Indian metals recycling industry. I think somewhere you even touched about the environment aspect, in your question. I think what I'd like to really see here and what I would suggest is that the government must conduct a formal study or an audit in terms of, taking the key components like resource consumption, emission, carbon footprint related to every metal. I mean, that's for primary as well as secondary metals. And I can only tell you one thing, I can assure you one thing, that once the results are out, I think government and the citizens alike would make recycling as part of their daily dharma as well as karma. So as an industry person, I'm completely against India becoming a destination for dumping of low quality scrap. But at the same time, in the same breath, I would like to say that blocking of any supply lines, scrap supply lines or raw material supply lines, either through domestic or through imports of good quality scrap meant to be recycled, converted into semi-finished or finished products would be against national interest. So that's how I'll sum up the background of the industry and the context of this discussion. Yeah.
Sure, sir. The points we have got is about the quality. So if we talk about a particular country which was very particular about the quality of scraps in recent years, was the China. And China's national salt policy and other measures to restrict the scrap import has resulted in the diversion of entire global scrap chain towards the India, or you can say the South Asian countries. So this will help facilitate their fair trade of scrap and will enable the availability of right quality of scrap at the right place, and also ensure the quality and a product with a zero harmful effect on the environment. So that was their objective. What's your take on this? Means should India also follow the same, or is this the industry scenario is different, and what may be the best way to deal with?
Again, the whole process or the discussion related to what happened in China and what they did, I think first of all, we must understand that we are not China. We must follow our own story. We must follow what is required in India, and how best we can sort of learning from what has happened and transpired in other countries, how exactly we can sort of learn from that and build that on when we look at how we look at the scrap industry or what's the best for the secondary materials. Now, overall, I could only say one thing, that we have a very, very fertile landscape when it comes to the metal recycling industry. I think for whatever reasons, China overhauled its policy. I think somewhere, if you read between the lines, I think it was just purely not in terms of just being a dumping ground for bad materials or low quality scrap. I think it also, the trade wars kind of acted as a catalyst to this whole discussion, because US was one of the largest suppliers of scrap to China. And overall, I think it also kind of became a talking point that how well or how not so well they have controlled their importations of scrap, in terms of quality management or quality checks maintained at the customs. I think India is far away from that. I think we have a very, very, I would say, robust system when it comes to the quality checks. And one more thing, I think, you see, today, China has reversed what they originally thought, and that's where they implemented the green sword, and they said that we don't want any scraps. But if you see what has transpired in the last 1 year, is they have started buying scrap from the overseas market. It's only that instead of calling it scrap, they call it resource raw materials. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that today, not buying scrap or not optimally using scrap for production of materials, they also realize that that's not the way forward. It's rather sort of going to get their industry down and their products, at a global level when they compete. It's going to sort of hurt them back. So obviously there were half the people who kind of, they went and established shops in, say, Malaysia or Thailand, and they started acting as, suppliers to China. And now half the industry is again getting back to where they were. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that India, when it looks at its policy and sort of how to sort of, ensure that those kind of hiccups or those kind of, they don't stumble upon such things, I think our policy needs to be more holistic. Our policy needs to sort of cover everything, every component that kind of, where people faltered, and we need to make our own story. As far as the quality part of it is concerned, I would say that today, the onus of ensuring the right quality, as much as we importers or like the consumers here are extremely mindful, because costs have gone up. The cost of treating bad material has shot up several times. So the point here is that if you're into competitive production or making anything which is world class, because today the world is your market, and I explained to you with citing you the example of where the secondary aluminum is flowing out, to countries like Japan, likewise your lead or likewise your copper. The point here is that you cannot compromise with quality, and if the right input has to be matched for the output, I think you just cannot simply afford to dabble or sort of look at juggle around with bad quality materials. So all in all, if I have to sort of answer you, I think by end of the day, the Indian secondary industry fully realizes that their capabilities or their growth cannot be with bad quality materials. So while scrap in itself is a very good commodity, it's a good word, it's a good material to have, I think everybody is sensitive to the fact that bad qualities don't help. And I think if you're looking at long-term sustainable growth, that will never come with such juggling. I think we will have to sort of look at reliable qualities, consistent qualities, high good qualities, and that's about it. So in my opinion, as far as the way I see it is that the policies, whatever way we design this, so should be sensitive that the industry needs to grow. Scrap is eventually, you see, there will be some variables into it. You can never treat scrap as some sort of a consistent, uniform primary product with a specification or whatever. The vibrancy of the business, the competitiveness lies in the fact that today, as India, we have the capabilities with human hands and technology and infrastructure to sort of, combine all these elements and convert that into something which is adding value to our industry. So what I'm trying to say is that let's not take the shine away from this. The policies have to be conducive to the basic character of the scrap, and we should be able to extract optimal value from it.
Thank you. I have another question, Mr. Shah. That is, the National Steel Policy of 2017, as we know, envisages contribution from the EAF-IF route around 35 to 40%. Now, this will increase the requirement of steel scrap from the present level of 30 million tons to more than 70 million tons by 2030. Now, my question is, will India be able to secure that high volume of scrap by 2030? And what will be the domestic contribution by that deadline?
So at the outset, when I look at the steel policy, I think it's a very visionary document, which primarily has nations' growth and development as its core theme. Now, today being perhaps the second largest producer of steel, our per capita consumption is still about 74, 75 kgs as against, say, 220 or 230 kgs at the world level. So I think we definitely have a lot of ground to cover, and that too very quick. Now, if you look at the overall resource savings, the EAF and the IF route perhaps makes the best choice in terms of where the future is. The world is more and more embarking towards the green steel. And I think India also needs to be prepared for that transition. Now, talking about India's need for scrap as raw material and whether there would be enough scrap available or not, personally, I think we would need to do whatever is necessary first to optimally explore our domestic availabilities, similar to what China is doing. You see, today they have about close to around, say, 250 million tons supplied through domestic routes. So we try to explore that part of it. Now, currently, the R word, recession, if I say, is resonating a lot in the Western world. Now, if there is such a prolonged period, then there could be lesser generation from these countries who are traditionally exporters of scrap. Also, I think every country is under pressure given the decarbonization targets of, what the commitments, what they have given, and particularly China. Scrap would be the most sought after commodity. So added to this, any disturbances in the shipping industry or in the policies, export policies of countries which are surplus in scrap could also challenge imports. So all in all, my take on this is that India will have to be at top in this game to ensure that to secure the scrap supplies from global markets. At the same time, we would have to look at optimally using our domestic sources and try to push it more and more deeper. I think programs like the vehicle scrappage policy will perhaps improve and address the concern that we have that how, whether we will be adequately covered as far as the scraps are concerned. So I think that answers your question.
So this steel scrap requirement, this also, there was a significant development as an ELV scrap recycling policy, which government released. And as we know, if we talk about the industry numbers, so in ELV scrapping cycle recovery percentage in India is about 70 to 75%. But if you talk about globally, so it ranges around 85 to 95%. So what is your take on recently launched ELV recycling policy? Will it be sufficient, or will it be pathbreaker to achieve future steel scrap requirement in India?
I think if you look by intent or by spirit, the ELV policy is or could be a game changer. As a society, we always looked at our vehicles as an asset class, regardless of its age and how polluting it could be. So at least an attempt has been made in the form of this policy, which could allow multiple issues to be addressed at one time. I mean, the core being curtailing emissions, pollution, plus raw material recoveries for our consumption, plus making our auto industry stronger in form of new sales. And I think the government has really gone all out to get the best people, the best practices in place, and setting up the required infrastructure to kind of see this policy successful. Now, talking about metal recoveries, I think first to compare India with the Western world would be a little too premature, considering that the formal vehicle recycling has just started here. But as I can see that, there are some big industrial marquee names who are direct stakeholders here, which basically kind of makes me believe that in terms of technology, machinery, there won't be any compromises. They will go for optimal recoveries, which kind of seems to be the future. So if you look at typical vehicle design or architecture, I think it's about 70-75% is metals, and about 25% you have items like tires, rubber, glass, gases, and volatiles. So I think if you ask me in terms of recovery, I think India should be able to meet the global standards in metal recovery, which kind of answers your question. But I think on the other items, I think it may perhaps take some time. But I think eventually it will come, because I think when you have collaborations with some of the world's best names, and as I said, in India with some of the top industrial houses also getting into this play, I think we should eventually improve on our recoveries.
Shah, the government had introduced a draft national non-ferrous metals scrap recycling policy in 2020. Now, what are your suggestions to make it better, to make it more practical?
I mean, at the outset, I could only state that I'm kind of excited, thrilled that over the last 3 to 4 years, there has been so much of buzz in India, and especially in government corridors, on issues like sustainability, circular economy, and resource efficiency. Now, every ministry, starting from the think tank itself, that's Niti Aayog, Ministry of Mines, Steel, Electronics, DPIIT, are all continually, making efforts, doing studies and issuing documents which support the causes that what I've mentioned here. Now, one very fundamental thing that all these documents embed or scream aloud is recycling. The draft national policy on aluminium and copper issued by Ministry of Mines is a step forward in that direction. However, I think it's important that these documents take into account the ground realities of our industry and just not create some sort of an idealistic template or a basic theory for our industry. We have an association called MRAI. I'm a founding member of that. And we have always believed that scrap coming either through domestic or import route, net makes a positive impact on the environment, on the economics, and the employment of this country. However, we still somehow, talking to the government, I feel that, we still get divided in terms of our opinions or, takes in terms of the imports, purely because I think there is a perception issue there. And I think I kind of answered that earlier on, that today is just kind of believed or some sort of an assumption that, that the scrap importers are using substandard or bringing substandard material. So I think we really need to put that theory to rest. The world over, if you see how things are changing, everywhere scrap is now becoming a valuable resource material, including China. I mean, I explained to you, there is kind of zero duty around the world, as governments don't want to tax scrap. They want it to be free flowing, and they want the mining routes to be closed just purely in terms of the conservation agenda, what they run, or a sort of decarbonization, and replace them with scrap. They want to get to net zero, and every country has made some sort of commitment to become net zero. Some countries are even insisting for a minimum recyclable content to be used in product design and output. But somehow we are not able to take still a very clear position on this. So I really hope that these draft policies should openly, clearly set the mandate out that more scrap and that's what is required for India. I think we must push for a higher usage. Internal, external sourcing needs to be sort of, looked at. And ultimately, I think this benefits our industry and our country overall.
Thank you. JP, you want to ask something?
Yeah. So there is one last question from our side, from the Steelmint side. Then we will take the attendees' question. So the recycling sector is very organized in other countries, or especially in the developed countries. So you can say that US or UK or European countries. Also in eastern side, the Japanese recycling industry is known for its well structured. So which country do you think, since you have well traveled and you're also, I think, heading the non-ferrous division of the BIR, Bureau of International Recycling. So which country has the best recycling model, and why do you think so? And can you please conclude any learning points for India which we can adopt?
I could only say that India has a very, very fertile landscape as far as recycling is concerned, and primarily on account of the skilled labor that we have in terms of separation of mixed materials. If you ask me about the Western countries, the average recycling rate is about close to 70-75%, whereas India is about right now at 25%. But I still feel that these numbers do not reflect the correct story. I think, and just purely because that there is a large percentage of informal sector at play, which kind of doesn't really get into that accounting. But it's really hard for me to pick one country and say that this model is the best or this country is doing a great job. I would say that overall, if I look at what's happening in the US and what's happening in the EU, people have made good technological advances in material sorting and segregation systems. This includes even sort of modern day scraps, generations like from electronics, EV batteries, solar panels, etc. So, however, they do not have a workforce like us. So ultimately, it gets down to making your own path, which kind of entails good quality, sustainability, and cost competitiveness, keeping global markets in mind. I've been in industry for about 25 years, and as I said, that the last 7-10 years, I've seen some sort of a paradigm shift in this business. While our workforce here provides us a distinct advantage, I still feel that it cannot solely win us the future. We've seen, in India, I've visited several plants and facilities, and I can say that, in the last few years, there is a lot of drift or sort of, leaning towards more technology. We've seen installations of shredders, heavy media plants, laser-induced sorting technologies, latest furnaces and casting lines. So the modern day recycling, if you ask me what's the take for India, I think it will be a good combination of human hands and technology. And I think that's going to take India forward. But overall, most importantly, because I think in terms of business, I think when you see growth, you don't mind reinvesting and you don't mind sort of, putting more machines and sort of technologies in place. But I think the key here for India is also to get the right policies. I think our Prime Minister has given a goal or a target of being net zero by 2070. And I personally feel that I'm quite excited that recycling industry could really take a lead in this, Also, I think if you talk about India and rest of the world, I think I must point out one very, very important change that is happening, transformation that is happening, that is about how countries are becoming more and more inward looking than outward looking. What I'm trying to say here is that in the last few years, there has been so much of chaos, disruption, polarization, if I could say so, that, everybody wants to create a safety perimeter when it comes to their resources. And I think when I say resources, scrap being at core. So one of the reasons, or one of the big discussions, a hot topic at BIR is about, EU, for example, is proposing a legislation which essentially would block scrap flowing out from EU to the non-OECD countries. Now, if you look at India, for example, in the non-ferrous side, I would say our imports are about close to, say, 25 to 30% from EU. So it kind of creates a big dent in terms of our flows or the appetite that we usually get from the EU. So I think they have a reason for that. They want to ensure that their industry has that security of raw materials, and that's about it. So I think when India looks at its sort of how to let this industry grow, they will have to sort of ensure that they really chase every good quality scrap that's available in global market. I mean, it's how we think that today, say example, oil or coal is an indispensable source for our country and it has to be imported. I think here you have scrap, which is absolutely eco-friendly with least of emissions. And I think you need to really create paths or ways to ensure that the movement of scrap is seamless. Last week I was in UAE at the BMR conference. UAE has issued a new law which is going to block steel scrap, mild steel and stainless steel scrap getting out of the country. So again, as you can see, that's still the philosophy or the idea behind this is still the same, that they want to make sure that there is enough material available for the local industry. And mind you, that they don't even have a stainless melting or consumption locally. But that's what it is. A couple of weeks back, I was talking to one of my colleagues who's representing Mexico at BIR, and he was telling me that Mexico is going to come up with a new law. And the reason why they don't want to do it is because of inflationary pressures in that country. They want to hold back. They want to ensure that the raw material stays in, and scrap is de facto going to be one of the materials, some qualities of scrap that will not be exported anymore. Similarly with South Africa, that they want to hold back their resources, and South Africa does not want its scrap to go out. So I guess the writing is on the wall that everybody is looking at some sort of protectionist measure in terms of ensuring that the scrap is adequate and is available first to the domestic industry. So if India has a chance to procure or chase or get enough scrap supplies, we kind of should do that. B is that, as I told you about duties, that today world over people are giving some sort of a green channel for scraps. I think we're probably the only country or an exception where we're still levying taxes on scrap. So I think these kind of gaps need to be plugged in, and I think the future is bright. I think the industry has the capability, the intent, and as I said, the output itself speaks volumes. That when you are able to deliver to world standards, I think you should encourage this industry and help them provide raw materials as what they need.
So we'll go over to a couple of attending queries now, and one gentleman wants to know, like, on one hand, there are these protectionist measures which are coming in from the world over. On the other hand, we have India's recycling policy. Now, do you think import volumes will be impacted going forward?
Import volume will be impacted out of what?
Import volumes coming into India will be impacted because we have protectionist measures being adopted by countries world over. And on the other hand, India is developing its own recycling policy for generating scrap within the country. So will that affect imports going forward?
So I think from India's point of view, we will have to look inward, outward. I would say that in the opening statement, I heard Mr. Sahu saying that, that there is inadequate infrastructure or whatever. I think purely by nature, what has happened is that it's still, the consumption base is very low. So today, whether you buy a vehicle or a fridge or an air conditioner, the shelf life that you have is kind of low. But what has happened on the other side is that the industry has grown phenomenally in terms of its capacities, because it's just not addressing or it's just not catering to India market. Now we're looking at world as a market. So what has happened is that the scrap appetite has increased significantly, whereas the domestic availability is very, very calibrated, restricted right now. But this eventually will change, because as the country progresses, as the per capita income increases, the consumption level increases, and you will have more scrap within the country. But what I mean by inward outward approach is that today we definitely need to push deeper in terms of getting our scraps from within the country. right? And as I said, this vehicle scrappage policy definitely is a paradigm shift that we're looking at, you see. So I think just like the way, if this is successfully implemented, say, for example, in cars, tomorrow you could look at air conditioners or refrigerators that once it reaches a certain end of life or a shelf life, it needs to be brought back to a authorized scrap center where the depolluting happens, and then it kind of gets converted into, processed into valuable raw materials. So that's what we need to do locally. But what I'm trying to say is that today internationally, there is going to be a scramble in terms of scraps, where every country wants to ensure that they get a slice of this pie. And I think India should not be lagging behind, because again, net, because everywhere you go, I think the general sort of interpretation is that why do we need to import? But net, if you follow the entire sequence of events that follow from after that import, is that we're just adding value. We're sort of positively impacting our environment, our economics, and employment. I mean, today we're one of the largest, I would say, employers in the country. So if that is the net effect, then why are we again so much against imports? And it's, again, today you are also exporting, so kind of you're kind of squaring it off. So I guess we really need to take a fresh look at this whole thing. And as I said, these imports are not hurting. If there is good quality scrap available, we must chase it, either domestic or either imports. It does not matter. Eventually, the protectionist approach by other countries, we can't control that. But till the time it's available to us, whatever is available to us, we must try and sort of get it to our side.
Sure. And we are also getting some good innovative questions from our attendee side also. And one of the significant question is on the taxation side. So there are a lot of news about the GST or since recycling. There is always issues with the taxation. So what is your probable? I mean, according to you, what may be the probable solution on part of taxation in the scrap or recycling industry, so that there will be a win-win situation for people involved as well as the government?
No, I think most of the let's say tax-related issues, and especially related to GST, I think as far as the import side is concerned, where consumers doing direct imports, I think they're quite okay. I think the question or the challenge here is about local sourcing, because as I explained earlier, that that there has been some sort of a hurdle when it comes to sort of because it's a multi-layered process, and it involves different levels or different engagements at of different people and companies. I think again, there is no magic wand to sort of change that, but I think with all the AI and with all the technology that the government has implemented to ensure that there is they plug in all the gaps as far as GST is concerned. So I guess it's changing, it's transforming itself very fast. And I think with the current sort of the new uploading of invoices and with the new requirements that are there, I think it essentially will sort of block any sort of leakages within the system. So overall, I would say one very simple thing, that there is a large part of the credible business which is there. I think that needs to be glorified, that needs to be focused at. With what is sort of missing here, and especially on the taxation side, I think as industry, we don't support that. So kind of if any company, any small company who is into sort of they kind of doesn't get to network or sort of work alongside the good guys. So I think by end of the day, and especially the government's initiatives themselves, that today with the new systems getting added, I think for sure in the next 1 or 2 years, I don't see any more leakages happening on the GST issues, and I think we are in the right direction that way.
Sir, another question is on the UAE scrap export ban. So our attendees asking, is there any possibility of reroute the export origin within the Gulf countries amid UAE scrap export ban?
No, I think I've spent a lot of time on this treaty and going, reading what's there, and even between the lines, I think by end of the day, as far as scrap is concerned, because there is, you have a list of products which are eliminated or which kind of don't get included in this treaty. And scrap has particularly got a very specific mention there that no scrap will be traded, and especially copper and aluminium scrap is what they have written there. That will be part of, that will be excluding this agreement what they have. So as such, I think the intent behind this treaty, or is to sort of look at value-added goods. And even in the value-added goods, I think the value addition what they have looked at is a minimum criteria or a minimum value addition of about 40%, which what they have spoken about. So, and even, with the past treaties, what we've had, wherever the gaps were, they are even looking at, like, if you are making a product which is meant to be covered under this treaty, even your inputs that go into making the final output product for export, the input product needs to change its tariff codes from the 4 digits or 6 digits. It needs to get into a completely different tariff code just with the value addition itself. So I think the government has done its best. I think both sides have done its best in ensuring that there is a proper value addition, because the basic sort of purpose is to sort of trade into goods and commodities, but value added. Nobody wants to sort of trade into basic raw materials, and scrap being a raw material. So I understand where they're coming from. I think for our industry, I think there are some provisions being made for downstream products. I think in copper there are a few categories, 4 categories of products, especially in copper wires, where they have allowed the free trade to take place. I think in steel, they have given some concessions, certain categories which India is not making at the moment. So I think the idea is to sort of, look at a very legit, beneficial trade on both sides of value-added goods and not basic raw materials.
Sure, sir. And we will conclude the session with the final question. So as you have mentioned that a lot of countries are considering the export ban. You mentioned about the UAE, you mentioned about the Mexico, also the South Africa. Apart from that, which all other countries are planning to consider the export ban? So this
all of every news has taken us by surprise. So basically, at BIR, at MRAI, and every other forum, we are very vocal about the spirit of free trade being upheld. And I think when countries put in such restrictions, I think it kind of adds our work, and the advocacy has to start that, you start questioning that why this has to happen. So definitely there is no such prior information available that which country will sort of going to ban scrap. But all I'm trying to say is that today, as an industry, we must ensure that, the free trade needs to prevail. I think today, India largely sort of represents it's an importing country. We are scrap deficit, so we import. So definitely any such move or any such restrictions definitely hurt our interest. So that's why I said that when other countries are looking in that direction, or sort of ensuring that there's raw material security by kind of making scrap availability either through imports or domestic a bit more difficult. So domestic, they have taken initiatives, but I think on the import side, when we have taxes or we have several sort of conditions to comply with, I think we just need to understand that where the flow is and what kind of changes that are happening around the world. So I think, as I said, the message here was very clear that India should look at opportunities, identify those areas where they can still continue to sort of buy good scrap competitive at a competitive price, and ensure that they bring it down, or sort of to make sure that their industry is able to sort of use that and convert that into value-added products. I think, as I said, ultimately it helps us as a society, as a country, and it also helps to grow our exports.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Shah. That's all we can accommodate in this session. And for those of you whose queries remained unanswered, do write to us separately and we will get the answers from our esteemed speaker. Hope you'll enjoy the webinar on India's policies and initiatives in the recycling sector. What are the challenges ahead? A very warm thank you, Mr. Thawal, for giving us your valuable time. Thank you to Jayaprakash, AGM, Scrap and Recycling Steel Mint for joining in too. A big thank you again to the Ministry of Steel and the Indian Steel Association for their local support. With the end of this session, we draw the curtains on Engage 3.0. Hope to see you all in another season. I'm Madhumita Mukherjee, Editor Steel Mint, bidding goodbye.